My mother-in-law accuses me of wanting to take over the family property after snooping through my belongings. But in front of the family, I tell her it was a trap set by her son. My husband and I have been together for 4 years. We've lived together for the past 2 years and have been married for a year. Our relationship is pretty peaceful, if you leave out the demon that is my mother-in-law. Although, honestly, I don't feel bad for her, because she doesn't seem to like many people. So we've made peace with that. We maintain a cordial relationship with her. We invite her to dinners and events, and she does the same, but we don't have a deeper relationship. A couple of months ago, my father-in-law passed away from a heart attack. That really made me more understanding of my mother-in-law, since I was very young when I lost my dad. I know what that kind of thing does to families, especially my mom. I know how difficult it was for her after my father's death, so I made an effort to be nicer to her. We decided to start inviting her over for dinner every other weekend, and I could tell that, at least at first, she was grateful for it. After that, I don't know why, but she started snooping around our house. It took us a while to realize, but after a while, we were pretty sure that was exactly what he was doing. Every time, before or after dinner, he would excuse himself to go to the bathroom and take a while. But we never thought much of it, beyond the fact that the food had upset him and he needed to purge. Then she started learning things we'd never told her about, and she started asking us about them. Every time we tried to confront her about how she found out, she'd tell me she'd just guessed. But we weren't stupid. We knew there was no way she'd be that lucky with her guesses, and that they were all absolutely correct. For example, a couple of weeks ago, she somehow found out that my husband was considering a merger with another company. She was against that kind of thing because she believed it would show weakness, and she didn't want that to be the legacy of the company my father-in-law had built. So she confronted my husband about it, and we were puzzled as to how she had found out, since neither of us had told her anything. We knew she wouldn't take it well, so we planned to break the news to her contact. However, she found out, and that was that. They had a minor argument about it, and in the end, my husband had to give in and abandon his plans because his mother made a fuss. Also, since my father-in-law's death was so recent, I didn't want to make her feel worse. But try as we might, we couldn't figure out how she'd found out. Then, just 2 weeks ago, after dinner, she confronted me about my plans to freeze my eggs. I'd never spoken about it with anyone other than my husband. When I asked him how he knew, he told me he'd been lucky with his fortune-telling. Then he started giving me a lecture about how bad it was for me, based on his own feelings, which weren't backed up by facts. He told me I was young, and that instead of doing all that, I should start trying to have children and focus more on my family, instead of spending all day working, because that way things would be much better for everyone, and I wouldn't have to end up freezing my eggs and spending a ton of money on it. Obviously, after that, I was really upset, because I was somehow finding out things I had no way of knowing. By then, we had already deduced that he was snooping every time he came over to our house. It wasn't hard to figure out because our home office is across the hall from the bathroom. So we assumed she must be lying to us about going to the bathroom and wasn't firing up last night's enchiladas. Or maybe she was just taking a couple more minutes to snoop through our papers. The fusion plans were in the office, and I had a few tabs open on my laptop, also about freezing my eggs, where I was doing my research just before my mother-in-law arrived for dinner that day. These were the main clues that led us to discover what was really going on. But aside from these two, there were a couple of minor incidents not worth mentioning, but which alerted us. So, after dinner 2 weeks ago, when my mother-in-law left after giving me her lecture on the importance of family values, especially when we're young, I really lost my patience. I told my husband I couldn't do this anymore. I did my best to be a little more understanding, even though she'd always made it clear she didn't like me. But now, she was really invading our boundaries. I thought maybe we'd have to cut back on our dinners together, because this was already getting out of hand. Of course, if we accused her of snooping, she'd deny it and somehow play the victim. So we knew there was no point in confronting her. My husband agreed that she had crossed a line, and that something had to be done about it. We spent a couple of days very upset about the whole thing, but it was my husband who came up with a plan to screw her over. And it was actually brilliant, because this would totally prove that she had been snooping around in our things. We decided to print out a fake divorce petition, and made sure it looked real enough to convince someone. We made the terms of the petition very unfair to my husband. We both laughed a lot because it was really funny. Since we made the terms of the petition sound like I was seeking to take all the property belonging to him and his family, I knew that would really infuriate my mother-in-law. She already didn't like the fact that her son had married someone from a less privileged family than hers. I'm not saying I grew up poor or anything, but to my mother-in-law, if you cross a city line, It's like you're a commoner or something. However, he's not arrogant about it, unlike his mother. Anyway, we knew this was going to infuriate her, and our plan actually worked. A couple of days ago, we invited her over for dinner, but this time we also invited other family members. We had a big family dinner with my sister-in-law, her husband, and their children, and my husband's uncle and aunt. I get along well with them, and knew this would give them a laugh too. We were having a good time after dinner when, as usual, my mother-in-law excused herself to go to the bathroom. But this time, he didn't return until almost 30 minutes later. We knew what he was doing, but my sister-in-law started asking if he was okay. We told her not to worry, that when he comes, he always spends a little extra time in the bathroom, that we thought our house was helping him feel better, and that it was normal. Just as we expected, a couple of minutes after everyone had gotten worried, my mother-in-law burst into the living room with the papers we had purposely left in one of the office drawers, waving them angrily and yelling at me. She began cursing me, saying I had turned out to be exactly the kind of person she had hoped I would be. She said she always suspected she was wrong to let her son marry me, because she should have known I would look for the first opportunity to ruin their lives. And that's exactly what she was doing. Obviously, my husband and I weren't surprised by any of this, but everyone else was very confused and tried to ask her what was going on. Then, she told them she'd found those divorce papers at the office and started telling everyone I'd filed for divorce. My sister-in-law's husband asked her, then she wasn't sitting on the toilet, and my mother-in-law looked at him strangely and continued her attack. According to the terms of my request, I was going after everything they owned, all their property, and even their company. Even though my husband had been nothing but kind to me, and I knew perfectly well I wasn't entitled to any of it, she said she'd probably been waiting for an opportunity like this after my father-in-law's death. And since this was the perfect moment to strike, I began to reveal my true intentions. He called me gold digger, a snake, and said he wished nothing but the worst things for me. My husband and I remained calm. We didn't say anything, and I didn't lose my temper because we'd all seen this coming. We just waited patiently for her to finish her monologue while the others remained completely confused. When she seemed to run out of energy, we decided to finally tell her that this was a trap we'd set for her, and that she'd obviously fallen right into it. I told her that it was my husband and I who printed those papers for her to find because we knew this was going to happen, and it was pretty foolish of her to assume that, even if I were filing for divorce, I would keep the divorce papers in the same home office we both use frequently. Then, finally, she started to look confused and flipped through the petition papers once more, and it finally began to dawn on her that we had tricked her. I told her we had done all this just to prove that she had been snooping around every time she came to our house. We made sure family was around when she did this scene, so everyone would know what kind of person she was, and how much she hated me, even though I had nothing against her, and had even tried to be nice to her over the past few months. But she wasn't grateful. She was an incredibly selfish woman who couldn't see the good in anyone. We told her that after everything she said, there was no way we were letting her get involved in our lives again, and that we were done after such a level of disrespect. Then, she immediately started crying, saying she'd been cheated on, which obviously was true, but the truth came out that way, and we didn't want anything to do with her after that. The dinner ended on a sour note, and everyone else there decided not to talk about it anymore. But my mother-in-law has been seeking sympathy from anyone who will listen. By now, almost the entire family knows what happened at dinner that day. Some people are sympathetic. Some people have messaged us to tell us we did the right thing, but everyone seems to have an opinion about this. Anyway, we don't really care about that, but we do believe my mother-in-law has taken this very badly because, in addition to telling everyone, she's been texting my husband and trying to call him from time to time. She's been telling him I'm a malicious daughter-in-law, that I've turned his head, and all sorts of nonsense about me. She's been saying I'm manipulating him against her, and that I'm eventually going to break up this family, because apparently, if I can do something like this, I'll be able to do worse things in the future. The funniest thing is that it was my husband's idea. Even though I knew she'd just lost her husband a couple of months ago, and she was just trying to take care of her son like any mother would, and that's why she'd been snooping around. Now, even though it was actually my husband's idea, I went along with it. The only thing I feel guilty about is that we did it just a couple of months after her husband died. I know she was really devastated after that. I don't feel bad about anything else. This is the only part that feels a little heavy on my mind, and my conscience is pricking me now. So, do you think I should apologize for that? Nothing more, just that part. Edit. The reason my husband hasn't blocked his mother yet is because, obviously, she's older, and he doesn't want to regret his actions if something were to happen to her. I think it's a pretty valid reason not to want to block her, even though she's been horrible to us the past few weeks, and we don't want to hear anything from her right now. But in case of emergencies, we still want to be accessible to her because otherwise, I think it would be very unforgivable. Update 1. I hope you're all well. It's been 6 days since my last update, and we've stopped feeling guilty about what we did. Because, honestly, if she hadn't been snooping around, if she hadn't actively gone looking for what we were doing, instead of just doing the right thing and waiting for us to come to her with whatever news we had, then none of this would have happened. And besides, there was no need for her to make such a scene at family dinner. If she was really that upset about what she'd found, she could have waited and confronted us privately. Then, perhaps it would have been less embarrassing for her when she realized she was wrong. But no, she immediately believed the worst, decided to come and confront me in public, wanting to humiliate me. She said the most horrible things about me. So, I really don't think I should feel bad about what I did. The fact that her husband recently passed away is sad, but it doesn't excuse her behavior, very honestly. Anyway, as I mentioned, there were a few people who contacted us to tell us we'd done the right thing because the rumors were really spreading throughout the family, thanks to my mother-in-law. I don't know why she had to go and tell the whole family just to get a little sympathy. If anything, that distanced us from her even more, because at least we weren't telling everyone what had happened and trying to paint ourselves as victims. Yes, what we did at dinner maybe wasn't the nicest thing. We shouldn't have invited other family members, but they're pretty close to us, and we didn't want her to be able to deny anything about her behavior later, because I'm pretty sure she would have. At least now everyone knows the truth, can decide, and have their own opinions. And little by little, that number has been growing because, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are many people in the family who really don't get along with my mother-in-law, because she's not a very nice person in general, and she has a tendency to look down on people. Not just me in particular. She always has something negative to say about everyone. So, she has a kind of reputation, a very negative one, and this isn't working in her favor. I'm so glad this backfired because she was the one who decided to start gossiping about it. Obviously, the people who were at the family dinner haven't said anything about it yet, and they've made it very clear that they're completely fine with being on good terms with all of us. They just don't want to get involved in the drama, and we respect that. We've even apologized to them for dumping all this on them, but we also explained our side of the story, because it was important for them to be there at dinner so they could witness my mother-in-law's behavior, so she couldn't deny it later, and they understood that, too. So everything's fine between us, and we respect the fact that they don't want to get dragged into this mess because, honestly, we wouldn't want to be in their shoes. And I'm pretty sure there are some people who are sympathizing with my mother-in-law too. They can continue to do so. Most of them are the elders in the family, and they've also made their point clear. It's not like they've contacted me directly or anything, but I've heard from some people that these older relatives are siding with my mother-in-law, and they've been telling everyone not to talk to us and, in some way, pressuring us to apologize. Well, this will continue for a while. I can see it coming. But I'm glad to have some support on my side, at least, even without it. I think my husband and I would have been enough for each other, but we're grateful for what we have. Update 2. Everything can change in 2 weeks, and it's a bit annoying. Not because of the situation itself, but because my mother-in-law thinks she's entitled to something when she's the one who acted wrongly. But that's how things are with her, and one day she'll realize all the wrong she's done. Only maybe that day will come when I do something really bad and face the consequences. Basically, for the first few days after my last update, we didn't hear from her, and everything was going well because we thought this would finally blow over. But then, she decided to send my husband a very mean email about me, saying that everything I had said in the petition would eventually come true one day. And that day, my husband was going to regret not paying attention to his mother about me, because she knew I was only after him for his money and social status, and nothing else. And she knows what kind of woman I am. She knows that if I'm willing to stoop that low just to put her in her place, there's no telling what I might do. He also said he'd crawl back to her for comfort, but she wouldn't be there for him because she'd be so hurt that in this dire situation, he was choosing me over her. And the worst part is, she still has no idea the plan wasn't even mine. It was her son who came up with it. After that horrible message about me, my husband decided to tell her it wasn't even my idea, that it was his plan because he was fed up with her constantly interfering in his life. This wasn't anything new. She had always been like this since he was a child, and she always tried to control him. He never liked his girlfriends, and basically, he never liked anyone he was romantically involved with. I was obviously the last person, and obviously, he didn't like me either, and he never understood why, since I'd never done anything to make her feel that way. And in fact, despite her behavior, I always maintained my dignity and was very civil and cordial with her. After he told her it was his plan, he thought maybe she'd calm down with me. But then she decided to turn everything around and make it my fault. I don't even know how that was possible. I have to say I was quite surprised. But anyway, when she found out it was his idea, it took her a couple of hours, but then she finally responded, saying that it didn't matter whose idea it was. What mattered was that I had agreed to it, and that if I truly respected her as my mother-in-law, I would never have agreed to something so base and disgusting. So surprise, surprise, it was still my fault, and she wasn't willing to admit that maybe I wasn't to blame in this situation. It's literally insane. Anyway, when she started blaming me for all of this, my husband couldn't take it anymore. I had literally handed it to him that it had been his idea all along, and I had nothing to do with it, other than the fact that I had supported him. But even then, she somehow turned it into something ugly and made it my fault, saying that I had probably turned him against her to do something like this. It was the final straw for him, so he decided to block her. And honestly, it was something that was long overdue. She'd been trying her luck for a while, and she'd already gone too far. Personally, I was pretty glad she finally decided to block her, because I really didn't want this kind of drama to continue. It was getting annoying. So, after blocking her, we decided to finally put an end to it. But of course, that wasn't the case, because my mother-in-law decided to show up at our house the next day because she couldn't get in touch with him, and that's the worst thing in the world for a narcissist. In fact, if I'm being precise, she came only to confront her son, because she made that very clear when I tried to talk to her. We opened the door. We let her in because we were trying to be polite about the whole thing. But as soon as she was inside, she started yelling at my husband, saying he was letting me manipulate him, and that he needed to be smarter about what he was doing, that he looked stupid because he was so easily manipulated by someone like me, emphasizing that part, as if implying that I wasn't very smart, and that being able to manipulate him was a bit of a challenge. She told him she wasn't going to allow him to treat her that way, especially since she'd lost her husband so recently, because it wasn't the right thing to do, and he needed to know that. She told him he was on the wrong path, and that the only solution would be to somehow get me out of his life. And if she couldn't do that, at least what she could do was teach me to be more respectful to her instead of being so disgusting. I didn't like that at all. I tried to talk to her and tell her she couldn't talk to me like that. And then he literally turned around and came at me, pushing into my personal space, and started telling me that I had no right to tell him what he could or couldn't do under his son's roof. He literally started waving his finger in my face, and it was crazy. I took his finger and put it on his nose, because no one was going to come talk to me like that, especially not in my house. And when my husband saw all this happening, and that I was losing my patience, he decided to physically grab her arm and tell her he didn't trust her, especially after everything that had been said and done. My mother-in-law didn't like that at all, and she started crying, saying she couldn't believe I would treat her like this after everything she had lost in her life. She claimed she was only trying to protect him, and that she was trying to protect him from me. People like me didn't deserve it, and he should know it. By this point, I was really fed up with all this. So I told my husband I was going for a walk and would come back after she left, because I really didn't want to ruin my mood by dealing with her. It was a Sunday, and I'd had a pretty hectic week, so I didn't want to deal with her and ruin my weekend. After that, I went for a walk and came back about an hour later, and by then, she'd already left. So that was that. And now, we're not talking to her. And we're pretty happy about that because, honestly, we have nothing to say to her. And I hope she has nothing to say to us after this point. I think she's caused us enough trouble. We don't need any more. So I really hope she stays away from us after this. Update 3. I have some good news. A couple of weeks ago, my husband and I found out I'm pregnant. I'd been thinking about freezing my eggs, but I guess it's no longer necessary. We thought about it and decided to go ahead with it because now is a good time to do it. We recently posted it on social media, and everyone congratulated us. But of course, my mother-in-law had something negative to say. She'd been blocked everywhere, so she decided to contact us through a new email account. She told my husband that now that he was starting a family with me, he was going to see my true colors. She wished him luck, saying he would definitely need it. Obviously, she won't have anything to do with me, my husband, or his future grandchild. With that email, she sealed her fate. She was very passive-aggressive about it. But anyway, we're happy, and she can't take that away from us, no matter how hard she tries. Update 4. I can't believe it's been a year since I last wrote. Back then, I had my issues with my mother-in-law, but now we're best friends. Okay, that last part isn't true, but I have become a mother. But much more has changed in my life, in our lives recently. Besides my mother-in-law's. My little girl was born big and strong, and we're happy with her. It's been hard for us to adjust to being parents, but I think we've got that sorted out. Now, my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law has tried everything she could to upset me during my pregnancy, but she hasn't succeeded. She didn't take the traditional route of continuing to text me from different numbers or turning people against me. That's not what you expect with someone like my mother-in-law. Instead, she tried to make my husband jealous so he'd leave me, and then she did something even crazier. A few weeks or months after my last update, she started inviting a young man to her house for dinner. Someone young like my husband. You might be thinking, this woman got herself a lover, good for her. But no, it was a new son she adopted, not legally of course, to replace my husband. I told other people he was the son every mother wanted, because he did for her what my husband didn't. He loved her, listened to her, and cared for her like a mother. My husband didn't care for a second, and he even found what his mother was doing funny. He said, when we thought she had a stomach bug it was cute, now it's even sad. When he saw that my husband didn't care and carried on with his life as if nothing had changed, which wasn't my mother-in-law's intention, he stepped up his efforts. She started going to the family business because, she believed, her new son should start learning about the business. However, the business remained completely in my husband's hands. His sister has a stake in the company, but she doesn't participate and has her own career. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, received her house and some money. So it's not my mother-in-law's decision to work there. Until she finally realized that none of it was working, and she needed to step up her efforts, or she simply said, screw it, and didn't hide it anymore. She started dating her newly adopted son, or at least openly. Now there's a rumor that she might marry him, which may be true or just more rumors to annoy us. But my husband and sister-in-law aren't interested because, as I explained, she doesn't own a stake in the company, and all it will do is ruin her future if something bad happens. But beyond hoping she doesn't do anything stupid, my husband isn't going to do anything for her. He's tired of doing it, like when we invited her to our house because she was upset about her husband. But if we count from the time she introduced him as her son to the date she started dating him, we're talking about a little over 5 months after losing her husband, and she was in a new relationship, which seems to me a clear example of emotional incest, because it would have been better to introduce him as her boyfriend from the start than to say he was her son first. It seems like he has some kind of perverse fantasy. Well, I guess my mother-in-law has done more things during this time. But we were busy with my pregnancy and then with our daughter, so that's what we discovered or what's come to us. Update 5. About 2 years ago, my mother-in-law got married. We were invited to the wedding, but few people attended. Not even his sister wanted to go to that nonsense, according to him. She was married for a little over a year, until he asked for a divorce. But during all that time, she paid for the trips they took together, his car, and other expenses, as his income as a fitness trainer wasn't high enough to support that lifestyle. She even put the house they lived in his name as well. As a result, she's exhausted her savings, had to sell the house in the divorce to divide the assets, and had to move to a new, significantly smaller home. Of course, she asked my husband to help her buy out her soon-to-be ex-husband's share because she didn't want the family home to leave the family. But my husband offered to buy the entire property, since he wasn't going to help her. So my mother-in-law agreed, although in the process there were several scandals about her son not helping her, and so on. We've now moved into that much larger house after making some improvements. My mother-in-law has at least managed to buy a house with the share she got from her own property. But as far as her personal finances go, things aren't looking good at all, because she's been asking my husband and sister-in-law for money. Neither of them has been willing to give her anything, especially my sister-in-law. She was the most vocal in telling him he was making a mistake marrying that man. I guess she inherited some things from her mother. But unlike her mother, she was right. So that's all there is to it with my mother-in-law. Sometimes I think her jealousy, hatred for me, and all that poison she had inside led her to make the worst decisions. That's why when I find out something new about my mother-in-law and start to think I hate her, I try to calm down, because I don't want to end up like her. Hate has consumed her, and I don't want to go down that path.